Hello, this is psychicpodcasts.com. I'm Psychic Sahar. Today we are pleased to talk to Penny Kelly once more, author of 5 books on consciousness, spiritual awakening, healing, and nutrition. Penny, today I'd like to discuss your upcoming book, Consciousness and Energy Volume 1, which is already out, and as I understand from the last podcast, Volume 2 will be out next year in the spring.
That's right.
How did you come to write this book?
Oh, I've been involved in research into the brain and consciousness and intelligence and cognition for many years. And I think probably back in 1998, somewhere in there, I was hearing a lot of people talk about, quote, higher planes of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, do they really know what they're talking about? I mean, they sound like they do, but what is that? What does that mean? What's involved in that? And people were talking about angel realms, and I was dealing with, finishing or doing a lot of interviews with my book on elves, and people were questioning, etc. And so I set out to research the subject of other planes, P-L-A-N-E-S, and the book actually grew out of that research, which was just extraordinary, an extraordinary period of time once it began. So that's how the book came to be.
That's interesting. The actual title of the book is Consciousness and Energy, Volume 1, Multidimensionality and a Theory of Consciousness. How does one go about researching consciousness?
In order to research consciousness, you really have to take a position of complete openness, complete watchfulness, and you have to set a very deliberate intent to begin with. So you start out with, I am going to research the concept of planes of existence or dimensions of existence, etc. And for my own self, about probably 29, 30 years ago, I got to this point where I thought I'm going to every year set up a new course of study for myself in something. And so every January I give myself a subject of study. I assign myself a certain amount of reading, usually a half dozen books, and I have to do something with the information that I learned. So when I started this particular research, absolutely nothing happened for the first year.
Really?
So I felt like it was a failure, and I thought, well, let me put a second year into it, and we'll try and see if anything comes. And nothing happened that year either. So I thought, well, 3 strikes and out. I'll try one more year, and if nothing happens, I'll go on to a different topic. But that third year was like kaboom. And what you have to do once it begins, once the events begin to unfold, you have to honor both the objectivity that's required to be somewhat scientific, and you have to honor the subjectivity of what actually happened. Then you have to understand that the nature of consciousness is to create. And then you have to do some very careful record keeping and study of the perceptions and the experiences. So mine are all recorded and timed and dated, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all in what I call stream of consciousness order. And then you put out hypotheses, and then you look at that and you say, whoops, that doesn't fit there, and so you revise it and you revise it. And you continuously revise it. And that has been my practice for probably since Kundalini began back in 1979. So recently the Dalai Lama put out a book called, The Universe in a Single Atom, I think was the name of it. And he called for a very rigorous third-person investigation, as if you were a third person, combined with very rigorous first-person investigation. And that is, was a perfect description of what I've been doing for years. So that's how I go about researching, and as things begin to come together, you begin to be able to draw some conclusions and say, you know what, this is pretty consistent, and this is, I think we can count on this, and this appears to be the case here, and da-da-da.
So we can say that the first step is intention, and then the second step is flexibility, or being open-minded. And then it sounds to me that 3 and 4 is about keeping the balance between logic and intuition, where you're methodical enough to register dates and information that comes through, but at the same time being objective and in terms of being the observer as well as the person who's undergoing the experiment.
That's right. Yeah.
What can you tell us briefly, Kelly, about multidimensional existence?
Oh gosh, briefly. I think probably what would summarize multidimensional existence is that we all have multiple versions of ourselves, and these are created each time we think or imagine ourselves to be anywhere other than where we actually are at the moment.
So, hold on. So are you saying we are constantly creating ourselves, although we might not be aware of the other dimensions of ourselves?
That's right. We are powerful creators, and we create using consciousness, and consciousness is unlimited. So the result is that, every time you think about, well, I'd really like to do this, or you imagine yourself, let's say you're a single woman, you imagine yourself married, or you're a married woman imagining yourself single, or whatever. There's a piece of you that is sent off to create that experience. And there's just a whole bunch of selves that we are. We're a collection of selves, and we move from body to body very seamlessly. It's not even apparent. However, when, let's use, for example, somebody who has cancer and is in very difficult, condition, a very difficult condition. Okay, all of a sudden, let's say that there's a spontaneous remission. They wake up one morning and they're completely better. What happened? What happened is that they simply switched bodies. They moved into a body that is perfectly healthy. If you study the literature in terms of hypnosis, what you discover is that you can hypnotize somebody,
right,
and they can enter a state in which they are allergic to this, or one version of themselves needs glasses and another version doesn't. Or you see this often in the literature surrounding multiple personality disorder. Various personalities have different self-perceptions, different food preferences, different allergies, different medical conditions, and the person who is the multiple is really not aware of those others, and that's very similar to how we are now.
So it seems to me what you're saying is that, which we know, science know, that time is not linear, and that we have, and time can be expressed as, or parallel reality can be expressed as frequencies of time. And as spiritual beings, we can navigate through our consciousness these different time frequencies, and we can align with ourselves with a better frequency, which gives us actually the healthy body, or by attuning into that frequency, then physical changes can be anchored or affected on this plane.
Yes, and since consciousness is such a very powerful creator, the question then opens up as to, why aren't we creating better bodies? Why aren't we thinking ourselves well? Which is something that I address in From the Soil to the Stomach and say to people in that book. You can't just think yourself well. Well,
you have to sustain it.
That you can do that, but most people are not developed and powerful enough to be able to do that yet. I think we're moving there as a population, on a planet, but we're not there yet.
So we need to sustain it by starting with the basics, which is the healthy soil and the food, which we discussed in the previous podcast. Kelly, would you describe briefly or summarize the theory of consciousness?
Okay, let me let's see, how do I get my mind around this? Let me say that scientists have been struggling not only with this whole idea of consciousness and what is it and where does it come from, etc., but another major piece in what scientists have been struggling with is the concept of eternity versus change.
Yes.
If supposedly we have this whole eternal, timeless, changeless base or source from which we come, where does all the change come from?
Yes.
You know, why do people grow and die, trees grow and die, et cetera, et cetera? So what I realized is that there is, and this, you know, I'm going to summarize a lot of years of work here. When you enter into Kundalini, when Kundalini first occurs, what happens is you enter into this extraordinary place. It's called the I am, for lack of a better term. And for me, this place, I described it in my first book as this place where where I was just in this empty place. There was nothing there except these millions of twinkling little lights. And you know only one thing, you think only one thing, and that one thing is, I am. I exist. And that is the basis of the I am state. That is your basic source state. All those little twinkling lights are units of consciousness, I guess I'll call it. And those units of consciousness are intelligent, and you can communicate with them. So basically, the theory of consciousness goes like this. We have this I am state, which is absolutely silent, absolutely still, unmoving. There's nothing there. There's no, you know, houses and people and dogs and cats and none of that. It's just this state of existence. Out of that, or through that, these, for whatever reason, and here's the great mystery, something causes those particles of light to begin to gather together. That they begin to move together, and they become a being. Let's say it's you, for instance. As soon as you leave that I am state, which is just quiet, total awareness, you enter into what I call a state of consciousness, which is the state of duality. Not only am I existing, I am, but I am also moving. So you're aware of two things. I am and I'm moving. I exist and there's motion. From that motion, then, what you begin to discover is that if you float along, there are other centers of I am moving around you, and you bump into those, and now we have not only the concept of intelligence, but we have communication within self and with self and others. That then proceeds to evolve to an even more evolved state where these particles begin to work together, begin to communicate as if to say, you know, what could I do? What could you do? You know, what could we do? What could we create together? And that then becomes a pattern of thought. In order to create something, you have to create a pattern of thought. And so the theory of consciousness is this move from this I am source state into consciousness, which is duality, from there into intelligence, which is communication, and from there into thought, which is patterns that maintain existence. Where we're at now, which is, you know, looking at ourselves and saying, you know, who are you and what are you doing here and what could we create? So that pattern holds true all the way up. And I think New Age people or, you know, awakened people are beginning to say, what could we create here?
Yes. I think what you're talking about really is what has also been explored in terms of quantum physics, really. That we start with essentially the I am state, or the eternal self, or that central place of existence. So that's the first stage. And then the second stage is the duality, where consciousness is aware that it exists, but it also is in motion. Is that right? And then the third stage is when we start forming a thought pattern in order to create.
Third stage is when we begin communicating.
Communicating with each other.
Right.
Right. So that's being aware of the different aspects of the self?
Right, and the potentials that could be drawn
And the potential. That's the third stage.
Mm-hmm. And then the fourth stage is thought and the pattern that you have to come to in order to create anything. Whether you're creating let's say, a camera, or a stapler, or, a cake. You have to have a certain pattern that you go through, and in fulfilling the conditions of that pattern, you end up with either a camera or a cake.
Well, coming down, all the way to this physical level, that's pretty much the recipe for running a very good corporation.
Yes, it is.
That's really intriguing. The fact that consciousness communicates within itself before it actually forms a coherent pattern form.
Mm-hmm. That I think is a piece. There's a number of pieces there that have been missing. They're all out there, but nobody really has bothered to put them together.
Absolutely.
So.
That's really interesting. Penny, would you share some of the conclusions that your research led to in this book?
Okay. Let's see. I think probably one of the most astounding for me was that as we opened to our own multidimensional existence, we began to realize that we are not limited by time. It's a comment that you made just a few minutes ago. And this then leads to the end of time.
Yes.
And the end of time has always been something that has been vague and threatening and, hints at disaster, et cetera, But what I now see is that the end of time is just the end of using time as the dominant factor to organize perception and experience.
At this stage, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, and so in the book, when you read the book, what you see is that I experimented with creating alternate sets of perception and experience in order to learn from those very quickly, and then drew that into what I'll call the physical decision-making process and utilized it, in this case, to save my life.
Yes, wow.
So that's one thing. The end of time is not really the end of us or the end of the world.
It's not doomsday, yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's just the end of using time as the most dominant way of organizing perception.
Yes.
And linear perception becomes outdated. It becomes very, very slow and
old way of seeing things or perceiving reality.
Right. I think probably the second thing that I discovered, and this may sound very revolutionary, but we are not meant to die. And there's this whole theme that runs through the book, which I don't want to give away at this point. But
no, I
we're not meant to die. We're meant to continue evolving into immortality. And that immortality is really where or what Jesus, I think, was trying to talk about when he was on the planet, and I think he still is on the planet. But he was trying to teach people that if you keep on evolving yourself, you can come to this place where you can overcome death. And, the people of his time couldn't get it. And finally he said, okay, let me show you what I'm talking about. So he arranged with one of his apostles, Judas, in this particular case, to get himself, crucified. He went into the temple. He said, I'm going to create a fuss. I'm going to turn over all the tables, and I'm going to aggravate the bejabbers out of the priests, etc., and they're going to come after me, and we're going to let them crucify me, and then I'm going to be back, and I'm going to say, see, I told you so. So, in effect, he was trying to teach us that we need to stop believing in death and start believing in life. And that leads to this extraordinary realization, or what I came to in this extraordinary, there were some amazing experiences that I had throughout this research, just amazing. And I was trying to figure out what was the implication of this one or that one, and finally it all came together. And I realized, whoa, we are meant to use our consciousness and our great power of thought to maintain ourselves immortally.
And transcend death, really.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's one form of existence.
Yes. And there are probably about maybe 200 beings on the planet right now who have been able to do that. They stay well hidden and out of sight. They are of service to the world. But the majority of people really have no idea what incredible wonders are inside of them.
You think there are as many as 200 people?
I do.
Really? Because other authors and other books have expressed maybe 5 or 6.
No, I know more than that myself. So I would say there are probably at least 200. And if you take those who do not have a physical presence, a continuous physical presence, at that point you're talking about thousands. So I think, I don't know, in one of the podcasts we talked about developing the Christ mind God body.
Yes.
That body that develops, the transformation of the physical body, if you look at some of the very, very ancient pictures of India that or done in India, they'll show these people with these incredibly white skin. That's one of
glowing,
the things that happens. Yes, and it loses all of its color and looks kind of like alabaster, like china. And that is one of the signs of just extraordinary evolution. And when all of the flesh begins to turn into living light is what it's called. And that when you have achieved that, you have reached God body status. And you stop aging. You stop, you really don't need to eat, although you can enjoy food if you choose. There are just a whole lot of physical changes that occur. You don't sleep. You don't need sleep. And in fact, in the book I explain what sleep is and why we sleep and what we do when we're sleeping, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just, I think for myself, I've come to this this place of looking at the reality around us and going, oh, wow, look at what's possible.
Yes. But it sounds to me that you've taken a very vast subject and you've put it in a very kind of structured and simple way that the layman can understand. I can't wait to read your book. We wish you a lot of success, and I hope when the next book, the volume 2, is out, that we'd be able to talk and perhaps do another podcast.
Sure, that would be wonderful.
It's lovely talking to you, Penny Kelly. Thank you very much. And a reminder to our listeners, for more information on Penny, her Lily Hill Farm, and her work, please visit www.lilyhillfarm.org, and that's Lily with one L.
Thank you, Sahar.
Thank you, Penny, and all the best.